Sir, please carry on.
Okay, sure, thank you. So I'll just repeat the last couple of sentences that I said. Okay, so according to Sankhya, it would be impossible to speak of Purusha's self-identity in any meaningful way prior to the interaction between Purusha and Prakriti. Since it is only when the Avyakta begins its materialization as the Vyakta that time and space emerge. Even though Purusha is independent and non-material by its very nature, it must therefore get entangled in Prakriti and thus think of itself as dependent and material, leading to dukkha, suffering, precisely in order to then realize its true nature through a negative discernment. In other words, Purusha must become what it is not, that is Prakriti. Purusha must become what it is not in order to be what it always has been, that is, in order to realize what it always has been. This coming to itself of Purusha thus requires a necessary detour, as it were, through that which is radically other than itself. Purusha and Prakriti, according to their tradition, do not respectively embody the biological male and female. So they are not simply the male and the female, because everything, all embodiments are a function of Prakriti. But they are nevertheless distinctly gendered principles whose interaction creates the world. Though some commentators insist on playing down the sexual difference that is mobilized in this interaction, it is impossible to overlook the highly gendered semantics of the Sankhyan system. Kanchana Natarajan strongly argues that the dynamics between Purusha and Prakriti reflect a gender-stratified society that defines them as objects of pleasure and manipulation, as a source of bondage from which liberation was, and as awesome and fearful in their reproductive role. That the line between a metaphysical masculine principally defined is evident from the fact that the Karika refers to Purusha as Puman and Pumsaha, words that are used to denote the biological male, as is the word Purusha itself. On the other hand, the Karika describes Prakriti as Prasavadharmi, one whose dharma is to give birth, clearly identifying Prakriti with the maternal. But while these references to biological gender are few and far between in the Karika, they are pervasive in the pre-classical Sankhya tradition. Ishwara Krishna mostly elides he kind of ignores the messy and convoluted matrix of biological generation in the Karika. But one nevertheless discovers biology always already inscribed, albeit covertly, on the body of his elaborate metaphysical architectonics. Two of the major terms used as synonyms for Prakriti and Purusha respectively in pre-classical Sankhya are Kshetra and Kshetragya. Kshetra as in the field, Kshetragya, the field knower. Originally drawn from an agrarian vocabulary, these words are regularly used in Sanskrit literature to refer to the scene of population. Since the act of sowing is called knowing the field, the sexual act is often described as the man knowing the woman. The man engaging in reproductive sex is a Kshetragya, one who intimately knows the field of the woman he is sowing. The act of knowing, therefore, involves the prodding, digging, plowing, penetration of the female body in an act that is potentially generative. The reduction of the feminine to its maternal function is also evidenced in Sankhya by the use of the word avyakta to signify Prakriti or the Kshetra. It is only when Prakriti is known by Purusha and engages in the process of generation that she becomes Vyakta or manifest, and thereby conceivable to reason and ontology. This suggests an inability to comprehend the non-reproductive woman except as an unintelligible potentiality whose sole purpose is to actualize itself for the sake of another. Knowing in the agrarian context also implies owning, surveying, manipulating, governing, administering, reaping the fruits of. And this is suggested by the repeated deployment of the word Ishvara, Lord, in these texts to describe the Purusha or the Kshetragya in relation to the Kshetra. But while the Kshetragya is the lord of the Kshetra, he is himself lordless, Anishwara. And the Mahabharata uses words like presider and superintender to define his power. In the section of the Mahabharata known as Moksha Dharma, Bhishma, lying on his bed of arrows, explains Sankhya to the new king Yudhishthira in a flagrant rant against women. So I'm just briefly quoting this passage from the Moksha Dharma in the Mahabharata. So this is Bhishma telling Yudhishthira, while he is lying on his bed of arrows. Since, this is Bhishma, I'm quoting, since one is born from the mixture of semen and blood, one resides in the womb and that abode is full of excrement, urine, moisture and blood. Overcome by thirst, the being is flooded by these. One must know that women are the strands, the gunas, through which this cycle of life, death and rebirth is carried forth, is borne along. They are naturally, so women are naturally the Kshetra, and men possess the qualities of Kshetragya. Therefore, learned men in particular must not follow young women. They are sorceresses, terrible in form and confuse those who are not learned. They are immersed in rajas and are the eternal embodiment of the senses. It is because of attraction for them that semen is created and beings are born. These are the worms that get attached to one's body, worms as in insects and worms. One knows that these are not really part of one's body and flings them away. In that way, one should know that the offspring are also not really part of one's body and one should cast them aside, like worms. Beings are born from semen, juices and affection, determined naturally by the acts that they have performed earlier. An intelligent person ignores them. In the body and in the mind, in the beginning, the middle and the end, there is sorrow and nothing but grief. Know that misery is inherent in birth and that the ahankara enhances it. End quote. The gendered distinction between the metaphysical and the biological registers ceases to be intelligible here. According to Bhishma, like a sorceress, the woman confounds men with her charms and tricks them into producing semen, through which she sustains the vicious cycle of regeneration and traps them again in her slimy, suffocating, cavernous womb, which Bhishma describes. He describes the womb as, quote, full of excrement, urine, moisture and blood, end quote. Both the body and the mind are Prakriti's manifestations, says true incorruptible essence from all of material creation in its gross as well as subtle dimensions by the discriminative knowledge revealed by Sankhya. In such pre-classical Sankhya passages, Prakriti figures as a which the masculine Purusha must be liberated from, and yet which forms the necessary ground, the very condition of possibility for that liberation. While Ishvara Krishna's Sankhya Karika does away with the terms Kshetra and Kshetragya, it cannot quite shake off a genealogy sedimented with a precision of women's maternal function. The rigidly gentle, conscious knower and then immanent, non-conscious known is constitutive of the philosophy we find in the Karika. I want to ask why this asymmetry between Purusha and Prakriti is given the sign of irreducibility in Sankhya philosophy, and how is it that in which Purusha can appear, Sankhya takes such pains to preserve this differentially established identity? How and why is the boundary between the two secured? And what are the possibilities that are thereby foreclosed? Why is material being necessarily figured as feminine, while masculinized consciousness remains incapable of materialization, corporeality, embodiment, except as an erroneous misidentification that must be then rectified? Remember, Purusha must become what he is not in order to be what he always has been. But this becoming other, becoming material of Purusha is defined in Sankhya as the exclusive cause of dukkha from which he must be freed. A hierarchical gendered opposition between being and becoming, essence and appearance, is thereby established. And a radical distinction between what Purusha is and what Purusha merely appears as. In limiting Purusha's appearance as Prakriti merely to the realm of semblance, this opposition also signals an anxiety over drag, over the necessary yet delusional gender crossing between the masculine and the feminine. What if Purusha begins to enjoy himself too much in this performance, in this flamboyant and theatrical role play as Prakriti? What if he's unable or worse unwilling to remember and return to his masculine self? Since the feminine in Sankhya is essentially understood as the field that is known but does not possess the capacity to know, while the masculine is the one who knows without being known, such pleasure would imply that even the subject can perhaps be an object of desire, knowledge, sowing for another subject. But that would require the dangerous acknowledgement not only of Prakriti as a conscious, knowing subject, but also of a different order of desire. Purusha has so far only been the enjoyer, the recipient of pleasure. But the collapse between the desire to know Prakriti and the desire to be Prakriti would entail the admission of the pleasure in being desired, known, the pleasure in surrendering to another subject, in relinquishing or giving up control. A crucial metaphor used by Ishvara Krishna to illustrate the relationship between Purusha and Prakriti is the dynamic between Prakriti as a dancer, Nartaki, and Purusha as her passive audience. Purusha's passivity, however, is the peculiar impassivity of the sovereign server or spectator who sees without being seen, knows without being known. The text says, quote, as a dancer, Nartaki ceases from the dance after having been seen by the audience, so also Prakriti ceases after having been seen or manifested herself to Purusha. The Karika says that there is nothing more delicate than Prakriti, who says to herself, so this is, I'm quoting the Karika, where Prakriti says to herself, I have been seen, Drishtasmi, and never again comes into the sight of Purusha. The idea is that Prakriti lures and binds Purusha with her seductive, disarming dance. But once her trick is exposed, that is, once Purusha is able to see through her charms, once Purusha is able to make this distinction between itself and Prakriti, Prakriti returns to her unmanifest form out of embarrassment. This is explained further in the Karika, quote, then the Purusha, comfortably situated like a spectator, sees Prakriti whose activity has ceased due to the completion of her purpose, end quote. I have been seen as Prakriti, but does not her discernment of the fact that she has been seen, drishta, presuppose that she has seen the other seeing, and therefore that she is possessed of the capacity to see, drishti. Prakriti's embarrassment in this passage stems, I suggest, not from being seen, but from her awareness of being seen as seeing. This can only happen if she too has seen the one who sees. As if for a moment the light has revealed the spectator who so far had enjoyed the show from the anonymity of the dark gallery. Their eyes have met, momentous encounter. And this reciprocity of vision has given rise to the radical possibility that the other, that is Prakriti, could indeed be another subject in her own right, one who at once can see and be seen, know and be known. This knowledge, however, must immediately be disavowed and curtained off, since Purusha would be indistinguishable from Prakriti if he were suddenly capable of being seen, witnessed, known. As the field knower who surveys and plows his field, Purusha's power and sovereignty would be in serious threat of being undermined if he were to discover the feminine as seeing, as possessed of consciousness and discernment, as an autonomous subject of power and resistance. The spectator feels to acknowledge that the dancer might in fact dance also for her own sake than simply for another, that she might take pleasure and delight in showing herself forth in wondrous, vibrant, and playful movements, that she might perform herself to herself, that one can be simultaneously the knower and the known. I will conclude now. One of the most entrenched presuppositions in Western science and philosophy has been the opposition between by, from Aristotelian eidos or morphe that informs hule or matter, to even in biological science, for example, in Richard Dawkins's abstract idea of the DNA that organizes inactive passive matter. Consequently, a major challenge for feminist has been to integrate this assumption and think through the relationship between materiality and intelligibility, brute passivity and intelligent activity. These resources from Sankhya, the generativity and persistence of Sankhya matter, the seeming opposition and its privation, activity and passivity, body and mind, thought and extension, coming to be and passing away, transcendence and immanence, and indeed nature and culture, are all distinct yet hindered contiguous realities in a differential field pulsating with the plenitude of being, of which some discrete moments might be crystallized and marked as male and female. Sankhya matter makes itself known, shows itself from itself in such a way that it also concurrently withdraws unto itself. This is not a philosophy of physical reductionism, since materiality is here understood as differing from itself and as encompassing much more than what is given by gross bodies or a mechanistic billiard ball model of the universe. Instead, this is matter that is said in many ways, that which manifests as consciousness looking back at itself. Sankhya matter thus names the showing forth of matter as other than itself, as delightfully regenerating, proliferating, differentiating itself in its cosmic dance, and finding in it its own pleasure. Matter as the very unfolding of difference, as phenomena that exceed their reduction to mechanistic processes, and as a world building where nature emerges as culture, where culture dissimulates as nature, and whose open-ended and concealment takes place both in movements that are intelligible in terms of a rational teleology, as well as in accidental and inexplicable jerks that destabilize the progression of that telos. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible over the online platform? Uh, Dr. Tuhin Bhattacharya, can you get me? Can you hear me? Dr. Bhattacharya, can you get my voice? Hello, Dr. Bhattacharya, am I audible online? Can you hear my voice? Hello? Hello, I hope I am audible now, both offline and online across the internet. Dr. Bhattacharya, just check whether you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So thanks to Dr. Tuhin Bhattacharya for this incisive lecture on Sankhya philosophy and the kind of interpretations he has done. I had been in the chair for this session, so at the end of the lecture, my first task is to invite questions from this small offline audience that we have, as well as the online audience. I do not know what size it is. So I would first invite questions from the offline audience. If there are questions, please come over to the podium and use the microphone. If somebody has any question, anyone in the audience here?
There are some people online too. I think if
Yes.
anyone has questions online, you can ask as well.
Yes. Questions, anyone from the online hearers, please use the icon of raising hands so that we can call you one by one. Sir, online No, it seems Dr. Bhattacharya's lecture has not produced questions right now, but for me, sitting in the chair, it has provoked a lot of thought. So out of that, I would like to offer one or two questions to Dr. Bhattacharya. Though I do not belong to the philosophy discipline, yet listening to your lecture, I was thinking of the surfacial dualism that Sankhya philosophy creates between Purusha and Prakriti, and I was wondering whether this surfacial dualism has other dualisms behind, because there is, as you have said, there was one state of Purusha in its engagement with Prakriti, and another pre-engagement state where Purusha, the nature of Purusha is not to be known. So isn't there within Purusha a dualism existing? And simultaneously, isn't there behind Prakriti, the nature of Prakriti as creating life and itself creating matter, isn't there also a similar dualism within Prakriti itself? That is my first question.
Thank you. The voice is sometimes breaking a little bit, so from what I understood, you're asking if there is a kind of dualism within Prakriti and within Purusha themselves.
Yes.
Is that your question? And
Yes.
I think I heard what you said about Prakriti being itself non-conscious, but also enabling consciousness in a way,
Yes.
even though it is itself unconscious. But I couldn't hear what you said about Purusha. Could you please repeat that?
You spoke of two states of Purusha. One, after its engagement with Prakriti, when it produces consciousness, and its pre-engagement state where it is not to be known, Sankhya known state. So isn't that also a kind of dualism? I would like to have your observation on that.
That's a fascinating question. Sorry? Yeah, so I was saying that, yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah, I think there is indeed a kind of dualism. I would say they both have two different forms. One is when they are interacting with each other, and one they are not. But actually, I find Purusha's transformation in a way more interesting because, well, on the one hand, as I said, there is not really anything that is said of Purusha before this entanglement. So my question is, does then Purusha not know himself before this entanglement, right? So it is as if in order to be independent, he has first to become dependent. Only then he can become independent, right? So there is this circuitous path that he has to take in order to become independent. But yeah, I think there is indeed a kind of dual stages. I don't know if I can call it dualism necessarily because ontologically, Sankhya would argue that Purusha remains the same. It actually never gets entangled in Prakriti. So the entanglement is only an illusion. It thinks that it is entangled. It thinks that it has become Prakriti. But once it realizes that it is not, and it has actually never been Prakriti, it can then separate itself from Prakriti. So I don't know if I would call it a dualism necessarily, in the sense of an ontological dualism, but we definitely see two modes for both Prakriti and Purusha, two very different modes, one when they're together and the other when they're not.
Yes, thank you. That was what what I was thinking of. And my second thought is that you were speaking of a consciousness that the Purusha gains through its engagement with Prakriti. The consciousness is one of the 23 principles that emerges. Is this consciousness to be comparable with what the Western canon calls logos?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. And this question, I don't know if there is a clear answer because logos in ancient Greek is a very complex term. It can mean so many things. It can at one level mean speech or word. That's how, in fact, the Bible uses it. You know, in the beginning there was the word, and the word used is logos there. So that is one sense, one meaning of it. The other meaning is a kind of ordering principle, something that brings things to order. Then there's the other meaning of reason, rationality, and even proportion or a ratio. Simulates so many different ideas under itself. As far as the relationship between logos and consciousness is concerned, I'm not sure if the way Plato make the distinction between the soul and the body. The soul, the word is sukhe, and Plato divides the soul in the Republic into three categories, into three parts. So there is the rational part of the soul, the passionate part of the soul, and then the appetitive part of the soul, right? So in a way, the soul is composed of reason and appetite and our desires, but in Sankhya, or even in Advaita Vedanta, I think, the consciousness does not include like thoughts and passions and emotions, which are included in the Platonic concept of the soul. But in Sankhya, for instance, all of that would be in the realm of Prakriti. Sankhya is just, in Sankhya, Purusha is this bare fact of consciousness which is totally contentless. There is no content there. While in Plato, for example, there is a content. Aristotle also understands Sukha in a different way, where it is more like a kind of life force. Then in modern Western philosophy, when we think of Descartes, for instance, for Descartes, the distinction is not between the body and the soul so much as between the body and the mind. Thought and extension, right? So mind is thought, matter is extension. But here again, in Sankhya, we see the mind or manas are thoughts, the intellect.